Welcome to Long Listen, where we slow down and sit with the ideas that most people rush past. This channel is about more than summaries. It's about breaking down powerful books, questioning their assumptions, and exploring what they really mean for our lives today. You wake up in the morning, not because you're excited about the day, but because your alarm won't stop ringing. You turn it off, lie there for a few seconds, and then instinctively grab your phone. 30 minutes pass without you noticing. You scroll through Instagram stories. Someone is working remotely from Bali. Someone else just posted photos from a Maldives honeymoon. Another friend announces their startup has raised funding, smiling confidently in a blazer you've never seen them wear before. You put the phone down, and suddenly a quiet question creeps in. What am I actually doing with my life? Not in a dramatic, suicidal way, more like a low-level background hum of confusion. You're not depressed. You're just unclear. And that quiet confusion tags along, from the shower, to the bus, to your desk, and sometimes even into bed. This is usually the moment when the word Ikigai shows up. Maybe in a YouTube thumbnail with soft pastel colors. Maybe in a reel promising to help you find your purpose. Ikigai, they say, is your reason for living. The thing that makes you jump out of bed every morning. The intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. It sounds beautiful, clean, logical. And somehow, after watching those videos, many people feel worse than before. Now, on top of not knowing what you're doing, you feel like you should know by now. Everyone online has their thing, their passion, their direction. So if Ikigai is the magical answer, why does hunting for it just feel like one more exhausting task on your list? Here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of the Ikigai content we consume today doesn't calm our anxiety. It quietly adds to it. It turns a gentle Japanese philosophy into a personal KPI. You're no longer just living. You're failing at life. Failing to jump out of bed excited. Failing to turn passion into money. Failing to look impressive enough. But what if that's not what Ikigai was ever meant to be? What if Ikigai was never about finding one perfect answer to the question, who am I? What if it wasn't designed to help 20-somethings figure out their entire life plan under fluorescent office lights and student loan pressure? What if Ikigai was originally something much quieter, much smaller, and much more forgiving? In the original book, Ikigai, The Secret to a Long and Happy Life, the authors don't start with ambitious young people chasing a purpose. They start with elderly men and women in Okinawa who wake up every morning, tend to their gardens, prepare simple meals, meet friends they've known for decades, and feel no urgent need to reinvent themselves. These people aren't asking, "What is my passion?" They're asking, "What needs to be done today?" And somehow, they keep going, calmly, meaningfully, for a very long time. So maybe the problem isn't that you don't have an Ikigai. Maybe the problem is that we've been taught to look for it in the wrong way, at the wrong time, with the wrong expectations. Today, we're going to talk about the real Ikigai from the book, not the social media version that's quietly stressing so many people out. If you've ever searched for Ikigai online, chances are the first thing you saw wasn't an old Japanese grandmother making tea. It was a diagram. 4 overlapping circles. What you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you can be paid for. In the middle of those circles sits Ikigai, glowing like the final answer to life. Clean, symmetrical, reassuring. It makes sense to a modern Western brain that likes frameworks, systems, and tidy conclusions. And to be fair, even the book Ikigai, The Secret to a Long and Happy Life by Héctor García Francesc Miralles, uses this diagram as a way to explain the idea. Here's where it gets interesting and a little uncomfortable. That famous four-circle diagram? It didn't come from Japan. Japanese experts like neuroscientist Ken Mogi and author Nicholas Kemp have called it out. Overly westernized, too career-obsessed, and honestly, pretty misleading. The original concept of Ikigai never required you to monetize your joy, or to find a single activity that neatly satisfies the market, your talents, your passions, and society's needs all at once. That expectation alone is enough to make anyone feel inadequate. And yet, Garcia and Miralles still use the diagram. Not because it's perfect, but because it's familiar. It's a bridge, a way to introduce a quiet, culturally specific idea to a global audience raised on productivity hacks and self-optimization. The real gold isn't in the diagram. It's what comes next. When the authors drop the theory and actually talk to people in Okinawa. Suddenly, Ikigai isn't a big career win. It's something way more ordinary and human. They meet elderly men and women in their 90s and hundreds who don't describe their Ikigai as a passion project or a calling. A 100-year-old man doesn't say he wakes up each morning driven by a grand mission. He says he walks to his garden, slowly, every day. He checks on his plants, pulls weeds, feels the soil with his hands. That's it. That's his morning. Another elderly woman talks about making tea for her neighbors. She's been doing it for decades. The movements are familiar, almost automatic, but she still finds comfort in them. Someone else mentions teaching their grandchild how to play shogi, not because they're trying to leave a legacy, but because it gives structure to the afternoon and connection to another human being. None of this looks impressive today. It's not scalable. It won't go viral. You can't build a brand on watering plants every day for 40 years. And that's exactly why it works. And yet, these are the very activities that keep these people mentally engaged, socially connected, and emotionally grounded well into old age. When you listen closely, a pattern emerges. Ikigai, in its lived form, is not about peak experiences. It's about continuity. This is where the Western obsession with finding your purpose quietly breaks down. We tend to imagine meaning as something dramatic. A revelation, a pivot, a moment where everything clicks. But the people in Okinawa aren't chasing moments. They're maintaining rhythms. Their Ikigai isn't something they discovered once and then proudly announced to the world. It's something they quietly protect through repetition, day after day, year after year. And this leads to one of the most important insights in the entire book. Ikigai doesn't need to be special. It needs to be sustainable. This idea is deceptively simple, but it changes everything. If something requires constant motivation, external validation, or perfect conditions to continue, it's probably not Ikigai. If it burns you out, isolates you, or makes you anxious about the future, it's likely working against the very thing it claims to offer. Think about how different this is from how young people are taught to think about their lives. We're encouraged to optimize early, to choose correctly, to turn our interests into income, to make sure our time is worth it. Under that pressure, even hobbies become stressful. Even rest starts to feel unproductive. Ikigai, in contrast, doesn't ask whether what you're doing is impressive. It asks whether you can keep doing it without hating your life. The Okinawan elders don't measure their worth by output or growth. They measure it by participation. Are they still part of something? Are they still useful in small ways? Do they still have a reason to leave the house, to speak to someone, to engage with the day? This is why many of them never truly retire in the Western sense. Retirement, when it means withdrawal from purpose and routine, is often associated with rapid physical and mental decline. Ikigai resists that by keeping life gently active, but never overwhelming. What's striking is how incompatible this version of Ikigai feels with social media culture. Platforms reward intensity, novelty, and constant reinvention. Okinawan Ikigai rewards consistency, familiarity, and staying in one place long enough for meaning to accumulate. One promises visibility, the other promises stability. One asks, "How can I stand out?" The other asks, "How can I continue?" This isn't anti-ambition. It just means growth isn't the goal. The goal is staying alive, really alive, in your body, your emotions, your relationships, without burning out your nervous system. When you view Ikigai through this lens, it stops being a source of pressure and starts becoming a kind of permission. Permission to care about small things. Permission to repeat yourself. Permission to build a life that doesn't need constant explanation. So if you're listening to this and thinking, "My life doesn't look anything like that," that's okay. You're not supposed to suddenly live like an Okinawan elder. The value here isn't imitation, it's recalibration. Ikigai isn't asking you to find the perfect answer to who you are. It's asking you to notice what quietly keeps you going, and to stop dismissing it just because it doesn't look impressive from the outside. Because in the end, the people who live the longest, happiest lives aren't the ones who figured everything out early. They're the ones who found something small, repeatable, and human, and kept showing up for it long after the excitement wore off. There's a reason Ikigai feels heavier for younger generations than it ever did for the people it was originally describing. It's not because Gen Z or millennials are weaker, more confused, or less disciplined. It's because we're living inside a constant comparison machine. Every day, often before we even get out of bed, we're exposed to hundreds of tiny life comparisons. Someone your age is already a founder. Someone else just exited their startup. Someone is traveling full-time, writing newsletters, building in public, finding their purpose. And without anyone explicitly saying it, a quiet deadline forms in your head. I need to figure my life out soon. This is how Ikigai gets distorted. Not into a philosophy of living, but into a countdown timer. Somewhere along the way, Ikigai became something you're supposed to find before 30, preferably before 25 if you want to feel ahead of the curve. And if you don't, well, good luck scrolling without feeling slightly behind, slightly anxious, slightly ashamed. We're not just searching for meaning, we're doing it under constant surveillance. Every choice feels watched. Every delay feels broadcast. Even uncertainty starts to feel like a mistake. So when Ikigai enters this environment, it doesn't arrive as comfort. It arrives as pressure. Ikigai online turns into a performance review. Passion? Check. Income? Check. Impact? Check. Miss one, and boom, you failed at life. It's like an annual KPI. Love it, monetize it, change the world, and smile while you're at it. Ikigai online turns into a performance review. Passion? Check. Income? Check. Impact? Check. Miss one, and boom, you failed at life. It's like an annual KPI. Love it, monetize it, change the world, and smile while you're at it. Miss one box, and suddenly it feels like fail Ren Sheng. The irony is that this pressure directly contradicts everything Ikigai was meant to protect against. The Okinawan elders weren't racing against anyone. They weren't measuring themselves against people 10 years younger. They weren't consuming highlight reels of other people's lives. Their Ikigai wasn't something they announced. It was something they quietly lived. And most importantly, it wasn't tied to a specific age or milestone. It wasn't urgent. It was patient. Modern life, however, is anything but patient. We live in a culture that treats uncertainty as a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. "What do you want to do with your life?" is asked as if it's a reasonable question to answer at 22. And if you hesitate too long, concern creeps in. Sometimes from others, often from yourself. You start to believe that not knowing is dangerous, that drifting is failure, that meaning is something you either lock down early or miss forever. This is where Viktor Frankl becomes incredibly important. In Man's Search for Meaning, Frankl doesn't present meaning as something you discover once and then live happily ever after. He presents meaning as something that emerges through how you respond to circumstances, especially the ones you didn't choose. Frankl observed that even in the most brutal, dehumanizing conditions, people still retained one last freedom: the freedom to choose their attitude. Not their situation. Not their outcome. Their attitude. That idea matters deeply in a world where young people feel trapped by comparison. You may not be able to control the economy, the job market, your family expectations, or the fact that someone younger than you just bought a house. But you can still choose how you relate to your current stage of life. You can choose not to turn uncertainty into self-loathing. You can choose not to interpret not knowing yet as a personal flaw. Frankl's view quietly dismantles the idea that Ikigai must be something grand or permanent. Meaning, in his framework, is situational. It changes. It adapts. Sometimes meaning is found in creation, sometimes in experience, and sometimes, and this is the hardest part, in endurance. Sometimes the meaning of your life right now is simply how you carry yourself through a period that makes no sense yet. This hits hard for a generation obsessed with optimization. We crave clarity, direction, proof we're on track. But real Ikigai doesn't give certainty. It gives orientation. It doesn't tell you where you'll end up. It helps you decide how to walk while you're lost. FOMO amplifies this struggle. Fear of missing out doesn't just apply to parties or travel anymore. It applies to entire lives. You're not just afraid of missing an event. You're afraid of missing the right version of yourself, the version who chose correctly, who didn't waste time, who turned the right interest into the right career at the right moment. Under this pressure, Ikigai becomes something you chase instead of something you cultivate. And chasing meaning almost always backfires. What the book quietly suggests, without ever saying it explicitly, is that Ikigai often appears after you stop demanding it to justify your existence. The Okinawan elders didn't wake up asking, "Is this meaningful enough?" They woke up asking, "What needs my attention today?" There's a humility in that question that modern life rarely encourages. It shifts focus away from identity and toward participation, away from self-definition and toward engagement. This doesn't mean ambition is wrong or that wanting more is unhealthy. It means ambition without patience turns toxic. It means meaning without context becomes empty. Ikigai isn't something you owe the world. It's something you build a relationship with over time. And relationships, by nature, cannot be rushed. For many young people, the most radical idea in Ikigai is not purpose. It's permission. Permission to be unfinished. Permission to have phases that don't translate well into a LinkedIn bio. Permission to do things that matter only to you and a small circle of people. Permission to let meaning grow quietly instead of announcing it prematurely. Frankl reminds us that life doesn't ask us for a single, final answer. It keeps asking new questions, and our responsibility is simply to respond as honestly as we can with the resources we have at that moment. When you see Ikigai this way, it stops being a destination and starts becoming a posture. A way of facing your days without demanding they prove something immediately. So, if you're 25 and feel behind, Ikigai isn't a failure to find. It's something you're still allowed to grow into. If you're 30 and your life doesn't match the online versions, you didn't miss your shot. You're just living in real time, not highlighting reels. And if you're tired of turning every interest into a potential career path, Ikigai offers a quieter question. What can I do today that makes tomorrow slightly easier to face? That question won't make you famous. It won't go viral. But answered consistently, it might just give you something far more valuable. A life that feels livable, even when it's unclear. Honestly, most of us don't lack meaning because life is empty. We lack it because we keep overlooking what we're already doing. Ikigai, when brought back down to earth, asks us to reverse that habit. It suggests that meaning doesn't live in dramatic future transformations, but in the quiet consistency of the present. Not in what you plan to become, but in what you actually repeat. One of the simplest and most powerful ways to understand Ikigai is this. It's the thing you keep doing, even when no one is watching, liking, or praising you. Not because you're disciplined, not because it's impressive, but because something about it feels right enough to return to. That might sound underwhelming in a culture obsessed with visibility, but it's precisely why it works. Think of those calm, focused moments. No chasing motivation, no obsessing over results. Just doing the thing. Writing clean code no one praises. Sending a thoughtful email that's just work. Tidying a spreadsheet for the next person. Watering your plant, trimming dead leaves. Simple stuff that grounds you. None of these moments feel like purpose in the grand sense, but they feel grounded, stable, real. This is what psychologists call a flow state, when the challenge is just enough to hold your attention and your skills are just enough to meet it. You don't feel euphoric. You don't feel heroic. You feel quietly absorbed. Time softens. The noise in your head fades. Flow doesn't announce itself as happiness, but it often leaves behind a sense of rightness. Ikigai lives very close to this state, not in constant excitement, but in sustained engagement. What matters here is not the scale of the task, but the relationship you have with it. Flow doesn't care whether you're building a startup or refactoring a function. It cares whether you're present. This is why Ikigai doesn't require your work to be special or world-changing. It requires it to be inhabitable. Something you can stay inside without slowly resenting your life. This brings us to a second misunderstanding that quietly exhausts people. The idea that Ikigai lives somewhere in the future. That once you figure things out, life will finally begin. But Ikigai, as lived by the people in Okinawa, is radically unconcerned with the future in that way. The elderly woman making tea for her neighbors isn't thinking, "This is part of my longevity strategy." She's not trying to live to 100. She's thinking, "It's nice to share tea today." That's it. The meaning is immediate, local, contained within the moment. This aligns closely with mindfulness, though the book never frames it that way explicitly. Ikigai pulls your attention back to what's happening now, not as a productivity trick, but as a survival skill. When your sense of meaning is postponed until some imagined future version of yourself arrives, the present becomes unbearable. Everything feels like waiting. Ikigai resists that by rooting meaning in rhythm rather than outcome. Not, "What will this lead to?" but, "Can I show up for this today?" This is huge if you feel behind. If meaning's always later, timing feels like a race. But if it's in daily practice, deadlines vanish. No expiration on Ikigai, just today's small chance to show up for something worth doing. Another quiet relief Ikigai offers is the idea that it's allowed to change. In fact, it almost certainly will. One of the most damaging myths we inherit is that purpose must be singular and lifelong. That once you find your thing, you're supposed to stick with it forever. But that's not how humans work. It's not how life unfolds. Ikigai is not a contract. It's a relationship, and relationships evolve. At 22, your Ikigai might be playing games, streaming, building an online community, learning how to express yourself and feel seen. At 28, it might shift toward mentoring, teaching code to a younger sibling, or helping friends navigate a confusing career path. At 35, it could look like caring for a child, maintaining a small garden, cooking regular meals, and building a stable home. None of these invalidate the others. They're not betrayals of your true self. They're expressions of a self that's responding honestly to different seasons of life. This flexibility is crucial for mental health. When you allow Ikigai to change, you stop clinging to outdated versions of yourself. You stop forcing passion where there is none. You stop interpreting evolution as failure. Instead, you begin to see meaning as something that adapts alongside your responsibilities, energy levels, and values. This is where Atomic Habits fits almost perfectly into the Ikigai framework. James Clear's core idea, that systems matter more than goals, echoes everything we've seen so far. Goals are future-oriented, systems live in the present. A goal says, "One day, I'll be meaningful." A system says, "This is how I show up today." Ikigai thrives in systems. In habits you can maintain without heroic effort. In routines that quietly reinforce a sense of contribution and continuity. Similarly, Essentialism by Greg McKeown adds another layer of clarity. If Ikigai doesn't need to be special and meaning doesn't need to be maximal, then doing less, but doing it deeply, becomes an act of wisdom. Essentialism isn't about laziness. It's about choosing fewer commitments so that what remains can be inhabited fully. James Clear tells us systems beat goals. Greg McKeown reminds us depth beats volume. Together, they point toward a version of Ikigai that's actually livable for busy, overstimulated people. For busy young people drowning in work, family, sides, and endless noise. Ikigai isn't adding another big thing. It's subtracting the crap until a small, real thing becomes clear again. The thing you do with care. The task you don't rush through. The interaction you don't optimize away. When you start looking for Ikigai this way, something shifts. You stop asking, "What is my purpose?" and start asking, "What am I already doing that feels grounding?" You notice patterns instead of fantasies. You pay attention to what restores you rather than what impresses others. You begin to trust repetition instead of novelty. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means it becomes steadier. Ikigai doesn't promise constant happiness. It offers continuity. A reason to keep engaging even when motivation dips. Even when clarity disappears. Even when no one is clapping. In a world that rewards intensity, Ikigai quietly rewards endurance. In a culture obsessed with becoming, it honors being. And perhaps most importantly, it gives young people permission to build meaning the same way life is actually lived, slowly, unevenly, and without a final reveal. Ikigai isn't something you discover and declare. It's something you practice until it starts to feel like home. If there's one thing Ikigai quietly teaches us, it's this. Life doesn't need to justify itself every single day. You don't wake up each morning owing the world a breakthrough, a revelation, or a perfectly aligned purpose. Sometimes, waking up and staying engaged is already enough. Somewhere along the way, we started treating meaning like a destination. Arrive after the right choices, the right milestones, the right version of ourselves. But Ikigai, when stripped of its social media gloss, doesn't work like that. It doesn't wait for your life to be impressive before it shows up. It meets you exactly where you are, in the middle of routine, uncertainty, and very ordinary days. The people in Okinawa didn't live long, fulfilling lives because they cracked some secret code. They lived that way because they stayed connected to something simple and repeatable. They kept showing up for small roles that gave structure to their days and relevance to their presence. Their Ikigai wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It didn't need validation. It just needed to be lived. For people growing up in an age of constant comparison, this is quietly radical. It suggests that meaning isn't something you fall behind on. There's no race, no universal timeline, no deadline by which you're supposed to have it all figured out. Ikigai doesn't ask how old you are or what you've achieved. It asks a much gentler question. What helps you stay connected to life right now? That question matters because most people aren't actually lost. They're just exhausted from trying to become someone else, from measuring their insides against other people's outsides, from turning curiosity into pressure and interest into obligation. Ikigai offers an alternative. Stop trying to extract a grand meaning from your life and start noticing the small meanings already holding it together. It might be the quiet satisfaction of doing your work properly, even when no one notices. It might be the way your body relaxes when you move at your own pace. It might be the comfort of familiar routines, the pleasure of caring for something, or the calm focus that appears when you're fully present. None of these look impressive from the outside, but they don't need to. They're not trying to win anything. And yes, Ikigai changes. What shapes your life at 20 won't look the same at 35. That's not failure. That's just growth meeting reality. When you stop demanding that your purpose remain constant and monumental, you give yourself permission to evolve without panic. You allow meaning to follow your life instead of forcing your life to chase meaning. Viktor Frankl reminded us that even when circumstances are beyond our control, our attitude remains a choice. Ikigai lives in that space. Not as optimism, not as denial, but as a quiet commitment to remain engaged, to keep participating, to respond to life instead of withdrawing from it because it doesn't look the way you hoped it would by now. So maybe Ikigai isn't the reason you wake up every morning with excitement. Maybe it's the reason you don't completely give up on the days that feel flat. Maybe it's what helps you stay human in a world that constantly asks you to perform, optimize, and explain yourself. And maybe today doesn't need to be meaningful in a way you can articulate. Maybe today just needs to be lived with a bit of care. Maybe today's Ikigai is simple. Brewing a really good cup of coffee and actually tasting it. Listening to a favorite song without distractions. Texting a friend just to check in. Nothing dramatic happens. No one applauds. But you feel present, grounded, slightly more connected than before. And that's already a day with Ikigai.